Welcome to Drummer Daily. Here's my dad, Daniel Hadaway.
Well, hey there. Welcome back for more Drummer Daily. I hope that you are as happy to be hanging out with me as I am to be hanging out with you. I'm looking at the waveform here on my microphone, and it looks like the volume might be a little loud on this one or distorted, so I'm going to check that after this episode. So if this one's a little weird, maybe the next one won't be so weird. But I'm so excited because spring is starting to take shape here in Nashville. It's kind of early evening when I'm recording this episode, so the sun is starting to set. I'm not in front of the drum kit right now, but that's more out of kind of necessity, and that we did one of my drum intensives this weekend, and I took my drum kit over there and haven't to the studio and haven't had a chance to set it back up. In fact, once I'm done recording this podcast, I am going to set it back up and do some practicing, so I'm really excited about that. But before I get to that, I thought it'd be great to talk about drums, which is what you're here to talk about. And what you're here for, I hope. If not, maybe you just like hanging out with me. That's cool too. And I'm happy to have you either way. So today I got an email, a really nice email from Jesse, who gave me a couple of ideas for some questions. He said either you could answer me here in the email or maybe put them on the podcast. And so I thought, hey, I will never turn down a good idea for a podcast episode. So I thought I'd put this into a podcast episode. So he said it'd be cool if I kind of talked about at least my approach to how the differences between playing in a home studio, recording in a home studio, and recording in a professional studio. And I thought that's a great question. And then he gave me some reasons why he likes each way himself for different reasons, and I'm going to echo some of what he told me actually, because I kind of feel the same way about it. And that's there of course are a bunch of differences, depending. For me personally, I finally got my microphone situation. I'd say 80% of the way to being the same as a professional studio. There's a couple of room mics that I don't have that a professional studio will have, and a couple of the shape of the rooms obviously a little different than some professional studios, but not all. There actually are a lot of studios that have rooms similar to mine. But of course, really nice studios have cool outboard gear that you can run the mics through, either before you record, as you're going in to record it, or maybe after. So there's other cool stuff about recording in the studio. But as a drummer, the experience of drumming at home versus in a professional setting, or I just say, what I mean. When I say professional, I mean, there's other people working there. There's a producer. There's a lot of other people around, and it's a little more organized. So there is a difference in experience as a drummer, and so I thought I would talk about that. So the biggest difference is definitely for me the pace of the situation. There's nothing for me more comfortable and freeing than doing a home recording session. So if a producer has me, remotely record tracks that I'll then send to him or her for a song, to me, sitting down at the drum kit, getting the lights dim and the mood set right in the studio, and even the act for me of moving. I have a lot of moving, movable panels, wall panels that I can put up around the drum kit to kind of change the sound of the room that's getting picked up in the mics. Even the act of setting that stuff up and really kind of getting in the zone for recording is really enjoyable for me and very peaceful. It's nice to kind of slow down and do that, for me at least. Now, when it comes to actually playing, I really enjoy, again, the slow pace of, I don't feel any pressure when it's just me in the room. So if it takes me, 20 takes, I can do it. And also, it being just me, and not waiting on someone else to talk about anything. I can pretty quickly, you know, if I finish a take and know I need to do it again, I can jump back and start another take really quickly. So I can get things done pretty quickly. Whereas, you know, in a big studio, sometimes when there's a producer and engineer who need to talk about things for a minute, and I'm just kind of sitting there waiting, and so that can kind of make things take a little longer. I guess I'll jump back and talk about the differences as I go, because I'm going to forget some of these things that I talk about before I get done with all of them. To go back to the whole thing about the pace of setting up and everything, you know, when you're in a professional setting, you know, sometimes I'll show up and, you know, they'll still be setting up mics, and obviously you got to do that. You got to get sounds. So like, you know, you might sit at the kit and you might for 30 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever, just sit and hit the kick drum, you know, hit the toms, hit the snare, just like a sound check, you know, you might have same kind of thing in the studio, but it can go on for a good while sometimes in the studio. At home, you know, I don't really tear down my mic setup very much. And so, you know, it's a lot of like, I'll just play the kit and then I'll go around and kind of listen to things and then do it again a couple of times. But most of the time I kind of know what I'm going to get, because everything's always the same. In the studio, they might have different gear they're using, or, you know, they're setting it up. You know, the engineer might not work in that studio all the time, or the producer may not. And so they have to kind of figure things out. So it takes a little longer to set up. All right, so we talked about that. We talked about playing, you know, the pace. Definitely the playing, the pace of like how long it takes and waiting around is very much different in the home studio versus a professional setting. But all the things I kind of mentioned just now are kind of the positives of recording at home. But I do want to talk about some of the positives of recording at a professional studio. I will say the first thing that I like about recording in a professional studio is that when you go somewhere else and there's a producer and an engineer and everything's kind of set up, my responsibilities start and end with playing the drums. And so it's much easier to focus on my playing when I'm not thinking about remembering to save my session every once in a while so that if my computer crashes, I don't lose everything. If, you know, getting all the tracks, you know, armed and getting all the cable, you know, everything that can go wrong technically, you know, I don't have to worry about that stuff when I am in a professional studio. There's someone else whose job it is to worry about that stuff and take care of that stuff. So I can just think about my playing, and it makes it easier in some ways to do that. Another thing that I like about playing in a professional studio is as much as it is nice and freeing to, you know, only answer to yourself for your playing, sometimes it's really hard to have perspective on your own playing and really know if what you're doing is aligning really well with the track, or if it's maybe missing the mark a little bit, or even sometimes, you know, if you played, you know, if I played it with the right amount of, you know, if I played with the click well, if it was a good take from a technical perspective, if it actually felt pretty good or not. That kind of stuff can be hard to tell in the moment unless you listen back. And if you listen back, then you've doubled the amount of time, you know, you've spent. If you listen back to the whole track that you just recorded to figure that out, you've just doubled the amount of time you're spending on each take. Whereas if you're in a professional studio, there's a producer who's listening as you record it and will be able to tell you before, you know, by the time you're done recording it, whether or not that was a good take. So having someone else's perspective at a very basic level even is really helpful, at least to me. And the other thing about that is, you know, the time thing again, you know, I mentioned that it's a lot faster to maybe do a bunch of takes at home if I'm recording by myself. The downside of that is that, you know, I have to then, you know, record all those files. I have to save them all, bounce them all out, whatever I have to do to get all those files out to the producer who is somewhere else, email all those, and then I'm kind of done with the track for now, but then the producer might come back to me, you know, a week later even after listening and saying, you know what, we need to try this or that. So then I have to go back and set everything back up again if I took anything down, or kind of get back into it. And, you know, it can make, you know, adjustments a lot harder if you're doing it remote. Versus again, having a producer right there who's like, he's going to work you and keep pushing you until you get what he's looking for. Because at the end of the day, you know, unless it's your own band and you're producing it, you've always got to answer to somebody. And so I honestly would rather hear immediately, hey, that's not very good, do it again, than, you know, do a bunch of stuff that I think is really good, then wait a week and only to find out, oh, no, you need to do that again. So that's the other big difference, I think. Obviously, there's other things that I enjoy. I'm a control freak in some ways. And so I definitely enjoy having control over the drum sounds that I'm creating and put out. There's no one there to argue with me if it's just me to tell me, no, I think we need to go for this kind of snare sound or those cymbals or whatever. It's just me. And so there's no one there to tell me I'm wrong, which again, if I miss the mark on that stuff though, and then the producer emails me a week later and says, hey, we need a different snare sound, that can actually make it more difficult in the long run than if I just had someone there to tell me I'm wrong in the moment. So that's another kind of negative / positive depending on your perspective, I guess. The other thing is, but I do like the ability to it's very gratifying in the moment to create a drum sound that I really enjoy and a vibe that I enjoy. And, maybe add percussion tracks, really explore my own kind of creativity. I will say in the studio, personally, a lot of times, my first instinct in a professional setting, my first instinct after listening to a track without drums, a lot of times is not where it ends up. So if my first idea for a drum track and what it needs to be, a lot of times, many times, we will go through many different versions of that track on the drums before we end up with what the producer is happy with and he thinks is the best version of the drum track. So doesn't always, again, I will say that my instincts, I think, are different when I'm by myself and I have a lot of time to think about it. I'm not standing there on the clock, with someone looking at me saying, you got any ideas? Versus at home, I can just sit and think about it as long as I need to. So maybe my ideas come out a little better at home in that way. So anyway, if you've never recorded in the studio at all, I will say this, and this is something that anybody can do. I think if you're listening to this, most likely you're listening on a smartphone. Set up a video camera, set up an audio recorder of some, turn the voice memos app on or whatever, and just record yourself playing the drums in some way, and then listen back. It is the most eye-opening thing in the world to hear yourself played back, even if it's not great quality, just to hear where you're placing notes. And man, I am so surprised so many times when I either think, man, I played that well, that's sounding good. And then I listen back and man, I hear all the little places where I didn't quite line up with a click, or I rushed this or drug that or whatever. So it definitely can be very eye-opening to hear yourself recorded. Also, it can be very eye-opening in the opposite way, which is, you think you didn't do very well at all. And then you listen back and you're like, man, that actually sounds pretty good. And so I hope maybe that would be your takeaway from this. I hope you've enjoyed me talking about some of the differences. But even if you're not a studio drummer or you don't have a home studio, I would definitely encourage you to record yourself in some way. It doesn't have to be video. It can be. That's a whole nother set of eye-opening experiences to see yourself on video. I've gotten over that posting all these Instagram videos, seeing myself play the drums. But definitely at least hearing yourself recorded and hearing how your playing really comes across can be very eye-opening. So try that out. And thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me. This is the first episode after a gap in recording for me. So I feel like I'm always extra wordy in these. I always go long on these, but I hope you enjoyed that. And we'll talk again next time. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you again soon. Bye.